Hi everyone, my name is Vina, aka Miss WOC Reader, and welcome back to my channel. So I'm doing one of those like YouTube sins they tell you not to do, which is filming multiple videos in the same outfit, but like it is what it is. So I just wanted to sit down and have a little discussion based off of this conversation that I'm hearing a lot lately, and it's the conversation of fiction being like for escapism. And the thing is fiction really for escapism? Because I feel like this conversation mainly comes up lately when it's talking about Black books, and it's been happening a lot during Black History Month, and the examples people are using for escapism really aren't that much of an escape. Like, I feel like I saw a couple of discussions about this on TikTok, and one, I don't think TikTok is the app for these discussions that require a lot of nuance, because one of them was a TikTok that somebody sent me because she pulled from something I tweeted about to create that TikTok, and then she was talking clownery in that. And then another one, other people put in my attention, it was just like some girl talking about not wanting to hear or read about Black trauma in a book, and we've had that broader discussion before, but when this girl was talking about it, she wasn't talking necessarily about Black trauma. I feel like words mean things, and we use we use some words, and that's not the word we should be using. Like, it wasn't necessarily like a Black trauma, deep trauma type situation. It was more like this character mentioned leaving his job because of a microaggression, and it's different words that intersect, but like different connotations and different feelings that you get from them. And that was like the only bad part of the book for her, is that like he mentioned leaving his job because like the white people were like a little bit racist there, and like that's not the same thing as centering the book around trauma. Girl, sit down. But, and like I said, I don't believe TikTok is the place for those discussions, because I don't ever see these like videos where they're talking about it be more than like 2 to 3 minutes long. You need more than 2 to 3 minutes to have these conversations. So as far as, do I think reading is escapism? It can be escapism for you, but even when we think about like the big popular white fantasies, that's not really an escape from like war or poverty or racism or any of that stuff. Like, the last white fantasy that I read was heavily inspired by the civil rights movement, and I could tell, and it annoyed the shit out of me, because like there were no Black people in this book. There were white characters and like monsters, and we were using all like literally like it like, if you know anything about the civil rights movement, it was pulling events, and that annoyed me so much. And it's like, if a Black book were to do that same thing but actually mention the civil rights movement, people would have a problem, or people would call it like Black struggle or Black trauma. So it's interesting. People say they want these stories that do not feature Black trauma, and it's not necessarily Black specific trauma sometimes in a book. It could just be that the characters are Black and they're going through trauma. But also, I remember first coming to BookTube and everybody was hype. Well, not coming to BookTube because I wasn't on BookTube at that time. It was just like people kept trying to get me to watch. Just like people told me I like joined Book Twitter, and people were talking about Children of Blood and Bone because it was like the big Black fantasy of the time, and they were talking about, oh, it's different from those other books. It's not like Black trauma, and I'm like, yeah, it is. I read Children of Blood and Bone. There's a lot of trauma in there. There's a lot of violence. The difference was that it wasn't white against Black violence and trauma like in those contemporary books. It was Black on Black, but it was still a lot of trauma. There was like a lot of death and blood, and ooh, there was some stuff going on in that book. So, but I think when people see that it's two Black characters and it's in like a secondary world that doesn't really feel like our world, it's easier to turn that off. But I'm like, that doesn't excuse it from not being trauma. And for me, I know that I said I was pulling back a little bit from reading fantasies that are set in our world that feature racism, because they're not always done well, in my opinion. I like it to be a little bit more nuanced. So I like, when I'm reading these stories, for the main character to feel like a fully rounded person outside of all the racism that's going on. And I feel like the way that publishing is right now, what the agents and the editors want are these stories where racism is the main driver. And sometimes when I pick up these books, like, it feels like we're defining blackness based off of how white people are racist to you, and that doesn't sit well with me. So I did tell myself that if it's like, especially on the YA side, because I know what the editors there are pushing for. I've seen people's edit letters, and they like basically want them to strip out every little thing that would feel real and feel rounded about these characters, to hyper focus on this lesson they feel like they should teach white readers. So then I know sometimes when I see like racism in the synopsis for the, like, it's a hard pass, because a lot of times it'll be focused on the real life aspects, and the fantasy aspects kind of go out the window or like play secondary, and you can basically take out the magic and everything would read the same, which I'm not saying don't highlight those issues. A lot of my favorite books do highlight those issues, but there is a good way to do that where it's like, it still feels like I'm reading about real people, because at the end of the day I do want to feel about like I'm reading like real fully rounded people, but I want to read about the magic. I don't go into a fantasy for it to read exactly like a contemporary. So that was like my reason for pulling back a little bit from those stories. But like, I get it if that's like, you don't want to do that. But I don't like how people sometimes get on the internet and paint all black books with the broad brush of they're all about trauma, they're all about racism, they're all about violence. We don't get to just be black and do stuff. Because then they go and praise white books that kind of steal from our experiences and have all the same stuff, but you're not calling that white trauma. Or even worse, like, people will read a white book where there's like all types of abuse and stuff, and they're like, well, I never been through that, so like it doesn't matter to me. Or like, it's a very highly problematic book, and they're like, well, because I'm not from that particular group that they're offending, it doesn't bother me. And that also doesn't sit right with me. But also, like, I find sometimes too, when people bring up the discussion, they frame it as us needing more black joy stories versus black trauma stories, and I don't like that either. And I don't like that because it, just like the way Own Voices kind of started, where it's supposed to raise awareness, it just like ended up being co-opted and twisted into something that kind of made people the authority on that experience and kind of boxed in their book. I feel like that's what the black trauma versus black joy discussion is, because first of all, what is a black joy book truly? What is a black joy book? I've asked people and I still really haven't gotten a response, or if I've gotten a response, it's been suggestions of romance books. Like, every book is going to have some type of conflict. It's all about what the level of conflict is, and in a fantasy, especially like a high fantasy, you're going to have more conflict than in a low fantasy. If a real world versus secondary world is also going to make a difference on how you connect to the characters. So I don't know what I have not read a book like that was a fantasy that I would say like, this was so joyous, because I feel like every fantasy I've read, even like ones I've read when I was a child, there was like an oppressed people in there. So I don't know what these like black joy books are. Somebody asked me to rec them black joy books not too long ago, and I was struggling to, because that's just not how I see books. I'm like, well, I've read these really good books, but like, I don't know if they're gonna fit what you're asking for, because they weren't like perfect. Like, there was stuff going on, like, no, I don't know. But, and the thing is, life isn't just full of joyous moments, and hopefully your life isn't full of just traumatic moments, because that would really suck. I mean, I know some people definitely experience more than others, and it's a lot to deal with. I feel like you get moments of both throughout life, so it's not easy to just put it all in one box. Like, I don't have a problem with stories that do highlight these difficult experiences. My problem really just comes down to how they are executed, because I read books where they'll talk about racism and sometimes it's just like a casual mention. That does not automatically make the book traumatic. That we have this book about black kids going to school, trying to get into college or something, and like it mentions casually, like, you know, their school is very white, sometimes the white people can be aggressive, or like that doesn't automatically make it a trauma book. That makes it realistic. Like, that's something that you're gonna have to deal with when you go to a school where not everybody looks like you. But there's a difference between a book where there's a secret society of white people hunting down the only black people in the school versus a book where there are less black people in the school, but there's still enough of them where they can interact with each other and hang out and not feel alienated. And it's okay to talk about it in passing. Like, and that is part of the problem that I had with that one girl's video. And then like the idea that we should not, like that one lady, oh my gosh, the author who did her little video, she was like, oh, even I am pressured to write these stories about racism. I'm like, ma'am, you are indie. Who is putting the pressure on you? Because you can write whatever the fuck you want to write. Like, who is pressuring you to write these stories with fantasy racism? Nobody. And like I said, there's going to be conflict in a story. It all comes down to execution. I'm writing a story now that has some conflict in it. It's not racial conflict necessarily, because white people aren't the biggest deal in this story, but there's still going to be conflict. They're still going to mention that they are black, and there are going to be black specific experiences and events and cultural things in there. But I also wouldn't call it like a joyous story either. Like, we're not, like, I don't know. For some reason, when I think about joy, I think of like running through the flowers on a sunshiny day or something. And like a whole book can't just be running through the flowers on a sunshiny day. Like, you gotta have your good moments and your bad moments. Figure out the level of violence you want to have. Figure out how much reality you're going to put into it, and go from there. So I don't know if I was really making a lot of sense here, but let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. If you like this video, make sure and hit that like button. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll check in with you guys soon. Bye!